Hi, and welcome to the latest episode of History You Didn't Know But Should. I'm Ray,
And I'm Chris.
and today we're going back to the late 1800s, and we're going to be talking about a royal governor, a man who was the royal governor of North Carolina and royal governor of Virginia, and that is William Tryon. And Chris, I don't know about you, but I know you're a Virginian, but as a North Carolinian, the first time I think I ever heard of William Tryon was when I was in college, and one of my history teachers drove us up one day to Tryon Palace up in New Bern, North Carolina, and we got a tour of the grounds and everything there. That was probably the first time I came across William Tryon, but of course, in the years since, I've learned so much more about this man who was a very important governor both in North Carolina and New York.
Yeah, I remember, I was born in Virginia. And so, of course, I had the history of Williamsburg and Jamestown, kind of right at the back door. But coming into North Carolina and, history major in college, I remember one of my history instructors talking about what was known as the finest government house in the colonies. And, and of course, when I finally made it to Tryon Palace, what was interesting is that you could have a good dose of history and enjoy a beautiful, walk around the remodeled and reconstructed house. And then you could go just slightly down the way there, and you could discover the second greatest thing that happens, and that was the history of Pepsi Cola. And so, you kind of got the best of both worlds right there. You've got good soda and you've got good history, all right there in beautiful New Bern, which is absolutely a beautiful place for people to visit on the eastern part of North Carolina if they ever have a chance to go there. But Tryon's Palace will be that house that everybody seeks to model, to replicate, because it really was one of the finest government-sponsored houses that you could find in the colonies during this period.
Yeah, and I was just thinking as you was talking about the Pepsi Cola and trying. I remember when I went there, we went lunch at what was described as a British pub, there in New Bern, North Carolina, but which is interesting to begin with. But everybody else is having fish and chips and all this. You want to know what Ray had?
Hamburger
And fries. Yep.
That's that colonial nature there. You just had to stay away from the fish and chips.
But now I'm a big fan of fish and chips. So anyway, back to William Tryon. Tryon is one thing I find interesting about him is, of course, he is born in England. And he's not born into a wealthy family per se. I think they're a good family as far as wealth is concerned. But he's not born into a family attached to the royals or anything like that. He sort of comes into his wealth and his position by marrying a young lady called Margaret Wake. And she's of the West End of London. And it's through the marriage with Margaret that William Tryon, gets a lot of money. She comes in sort of like George Washington marrying Martha Washington. She had that large dowry from her previous marriage. And the same here with Margaret. She had that large dowry that when he married her, he of course had access to. And it was also through her that he got the connections that would ultimately lead him to North America and lead him to North Carolina.
And what's interesting is when he makes his way to North Carolina, he's got a brand new family, and he is basically appointed, if you will, as what did they call it? Was it lieutenant governor, I think, during the time, right? So still use the same terminology today, kind of like the vice president, if you will. Lieutenant governor really does nothing except serve the title and does everything that the governor doesn't want to do. And, one of the things that I found is that here he comes with his wife and also his daughter. And the reality is he doesn't have a home, nor does he have any income. And basically, He's given this opportunity to be a part of this wonderful experience. But Ray, he has no place to lay his head, and he has no income to be able to serve, to provide the needs of his family. And he is the acting lieutenant governor. So politics wasn't all about the money and the fame, especially during this time, because usually, and especially in colonial periods, when he becomes lieutenant governor, he's all of a sudden going to be put into a very precarious position. And then it's just going to escalate when he becomes governor, because we've talked about this in previous podcasts, but not everybody is a patriot. Not everybody's a loyalist. And you have the colony of North Carolina that is upset, frustrated, and mad with some of the things that the king is doing. And here is Tryon, who has gotten lieutenant governor and ultimately governor because of friends with the king. How do you balance that? That's got to be a tough position.
Yeah, and he comes over here because the governor, the royal governor. I want our listeners to understand these are royal officials. These are not people elected by the people of North Carolina like we would today. William Tryon and his predecessor Arthur Dobbs. These were people appointed by the crown, and he's sent over here to be lieutenant governor because Arthur Dobbs is old and he is in poor health. And unfortunately for Tryon, you mentioned that he sort of came over here and got in limbo because Dobbs didn't die or go away. He sort of stayed around for a little while. Ultimately, however, in March of 1765, Dobbs does die. And then Tryon is made governor of North Carolina, again, the royal governor of North Carolina. And what I find fascinating, Chris, is that he made his home, William Tryon made his home at what's called Brunswick Town. And this is one of these places in southeastern North Carolina, Chris, that it's just a jewel sitting out in the middle of the forest that so many people don't know anything about. And it's got both Rev-War or early colonial, early colonial history connections and Civil War connections. But he makes his home there at Brunswick Town, which is in Brunswick County, right on the Cape Fear River, between Southport and Wilmington. And that's where he sort of starts his life as governor as lieutenant governor, but also governor of North Carolina.
And a good point that you make is that he was appointed governor by the king. Yeah. And so here he is, a royal official granted the power to rule the colonists by the king. And you have these colonists who are really not engaged or interested in what the king has to say, much less who the king appoints to lead as governor. And during this time, there's the Stamp Act that's going on. And of course, the Stamp Act was, the British needed money, in their own opinion, to be able to provide protection for troops and things of that nature to oversee the establishment of these colonies. So they issue a stamp tax to be placed on paper products and even playing cards and things of that nature. And there is a strong opposition in North Carolina to the stamp tax. Well, here you have the acting governor, soon to be governor, who is appointed by the king. So Ray, he pretty much has to side with the king. He's in North Carolina overseeing the people, but yet his loyalty goes towards the King of England at this time. And so the best thing he knows to do is just to prevent the angry mob from meeting. So he cancels all of these Stamp Act opposition meetings. He puts everything on hold because in his mind, if he doesn't allow them to act in repealing the Stamp Act or being in opposition to the Stamp Act, he thinks that he can still maneuver both sides. He can play both games about that, to the point where he even told the colonists, hey, I know that the king appointed me, but I want you to know I don't support the stamp tax. And I don't support it so much so that I'm offering out of my own funds to pay for all of the taxes for the paper goods we have here in this area, which is great. But Ray, as we mentioned earlier, he has no income. So he's making these promises. I'll take care of it. I'm against it. And I think our listeners need to understand he's able to tell these colonists what he feels because they don't have email. They don't have video recordings. I mean, so yeah, so the king's not going to find out technically that, well, one of my people is talking junk about me and about my plans. So he's trying to play it both ways, to appease the people that are actually his subjects.
Yeah, and I think it's probably true that he didn't really support the tax, because even though he's appointed by the crown and all of that, I think he probably, by coming here, probably knew that that wasn't going to be well received. It wasn't going to go over well. So I'm sure he probably, and he's not the only British official, as you know, Chris. The Howe brothers, and I can't remember which one, actually made clear that he sort of didn't support some of the things that the crown was doing in the Revolutionary War. So it's not unheard of that some of these people have mixed feelings about what's going on. But like you said, as a royal governor, he didn't have a choice in the matter. He had to, just go in and enforce the law as much as he was required to do so. But it's in June of 1766 that he announces the end of the Stamp Act. And this is when he sort of gets himself in trouble. He's sort of, I guess, tried to keep people on his side with the Stamp Act, paying some of it and saying he's really against it. But then he decides we need a proper capital for the colony. And we're going to go to New Bern. We don't want to stay in Brunswick. That's too far south. We want to go to New Bern, which at the time, of course, was more central to the state. Now it's on the far eastern side of the state. But so he goes to New Bern, and then he puts in a tax. And Chris, I believe it was a poll tax, which, of course, is going to heavily impact farmers and just sort of everyday people. He puts in this poll tax to pay for the building of this quote unquote palace that he wants to build there in New Bern. And so between December 1766 and December 1770, construction is underway there in New Bern on his palace, and people are not going to be happy about this tax.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of reasons that they're not going to be happy. First of all, is that it is going to be an elaborate mansion. Now, he's, quote, saying that it's going to be for office space so that the work of the government can be done. It's a government building. But it's very simply that it is this mansion that will be called the governor's mansion. And I think it was interesting that he had an architect that he kind of brought with him, a guy by the name of Hawks. And he said, I want you to draw this up. And like the first set of plans that he drew, Tryon was basically like, no, this is ridiculous because it's not opulent. It's not massive. It's not big. It's this small little mansion. And so he goes back and says, hey, guys, Colonial North Carolina, we need to raise taxes. I need more money because what you're offering, 5,000 pounds, isn't going to cover it. Rather, it needs to be 10,000 pounds to do it. And I'm not looking for some plain mansion. We're North Carolina, and we're going to have a strong governor's place. And so he also then really ticks off the people of North Carolina because he said, I need you to go to Philadelphia. He tells the architect, he says, I need you to go up to Philadelphia and find workers to come back and build my mansion. No, Ray, I mean, if you're the governor of the colony of North Carolina, you're going to advocate to give your people work. What a greater opportunity to provide opportunities for people to earn some money by working on the mansion. But Tryon actually says that North Carolina workers would not know how to build such a building. They're not smart enough. They don't have what it takes.
He's buttering them up, isn't he?
Yeah, I mean, so he actually says, go up to Philadelphia where they know how to do it. I've seen them go up and get those Northerners, bring those Northerners down here to the South, and let them teach the North Carolinians how to do it. So, I mean, that's pretty bad when you're building the governor's house for the state of North Carolina, and yet you're going to choose to get other people to do it. In addition, one last thing that I needed to share with this is that the money that he made the legislature get to build the mansion was going to come from poll taxes and things like that. But Ray, it actually was money that, to get it started, was money that was to be used for the construction of public schools. So he actually goes and takes money earmarked for the construction of schools and says, I'm going to take that money and I'm going to use it to build the mansion. And oh, by the way, the other tax I remember now, Ray, it wasn't just a poll tax, but they also put a tax on alcohol. Well, those people in North Carolina, when you start making them pay extra for alcohol, that's going to cause a serious situation. And that's exactly what happened. So you got Northerners building your mansion, you stole money to build public schools, and you put a tax on their whiskey. That's enough to incite a rebellion anyway, which is why they started calling it Tryon's Palace, which is how we know it today.
Yeah. And it does cause a rebellion. Enter Hillsborough, North Carolina. It's sort of when you say Hillsborough is in the western part of the state, northwestern part, not the far northwestern part, right?
Right.
Sort of, is it east of Greensboro, northeast of Greensboro?
No, it's not. It's like right near what's that? You've got Greensboro, then Burlington, and then Durham, Raleigh. So it's kind of like in between Raleigh, Durham, and Greensboro. It's like right in the middle there. I think it's Orange County, Chapel Hill.
Yeah,
I think
Orange County. Yep. There's going to be a group of people known as regulators. And basically, these are people who are opposed to Tryon's taxes. They refuse to pay it. He's going to end up, I believe, on two separate occasions, one in 1771 and the first in 1768. He's going to actually send militia soldiers into Hillsborough to try to put down these regulators. And the second time in 1771, it was along the Alamance River. He's going to be successful in putting down the regulators. There's going to be a lot of people arrested, sentenced to death. He's actually going to pardon about half of the people who were sentenced to death, but a number of people are hung there along the Alamance River, I believe, because of their involvement in the regulator situation. And it's interesting to me, Chris, that it's while he is in 1771, it is while he is doing that he gets word that he's going to be going to New York to become the governor there.
Yeah, it's just another kick in the face to these people in North Carolina. I mean, first of all, he goes and gets, we've already said it. He's doing everything but support the people of North Carolina. One interesting side note about his palace, there was a terrible hurricane like in 1769 that destroyed like 3/4 of New Bern. And guess which building was still standing and didn't have any problems whatsoever? It was that massive Tryon's Palace. And even though it stood the test of time through that hurricane and survived the storm, he still didn't let people go in and seek it for refuge and all of that, because he said it was a place of government work, and so it couldn't be seen as a shelter.
Yeah, and he goes to New York in July of 1771 and takes on the role of governor there, and he steps into it there as well. This is a very contentious time. It's 1771. We're less than 5 years out from sort of the start of the American Revolution. And he goes up there and he runs into some trouble, ends up having to go to England to try to resolve some of these issues. And, Chris, I'm always going to try to find the George Washington connection.
Oh, good.
Yeah. And here's the George Washington connection. So he returns to New York on June 25, 1775. And of course, New York and the colonies are in a very different situation than they were when he left in 1773. And now he comes back to New York in 1775. He arrives on June 25, 1775. This is the exact same day that George Washington arrives in New York. So you have both men arriving, not at the same time. But what's interesting, of course, you have supporters for Tryon who go out and greet him. You have supporters for Washington that go out and greet him, but you've got a lot of people who are greeting both. You know, we often talk about the patriots and the loyalists, and that's true. There were those groups, but there were a lot of people who sort of floated from group to group, depending on which way they thought the tide was going.
You know, and that's kind of where this story of Tryon kind of goes when you start thinking about the legacy, because one of the good things that he did in North Carolina is he established a pretty good postal system. He was pretty much kind of the founder of the North Carolina postal system, and it was very well run. And, you know, there are some people who thought that he did a really good job in trying to help with trade. You know, I mean, New Bern's right there on the trade route with South Carolina and Virginia, and that was really good. But I think the other thing is that some people felt that he just didn't care about the people. He just didn't have that relationship with them. And then you start talking about his treatment with, you know, the regulators. And then during the Revolutionary War, you know, Tryon is doing some raids in Connecticut, which kind of goes against, you know, the Patriot leaders, especially, I think it was Patrick Henry, who said the name Tryon will forever be held in contempt. We want nothing to do with him. So there's a lot of good, but there's a lot of bad, which I think is what makes history so beautiful. Because when you look at Tryon, and you go and you look at that house, which is a reconstructed house. It's a model. It's not the original house. But when you go look, you know, you have to say, okay, I see what he was trying to do. I get the positive, but I also see that he went the wrong way of doing it. So history allows you to look at many sides of a character to understand their legacy.
Yeah, and you know, leaving North Carolina didn't help his legacy in North Carolina either.
No, but help me if I'm right on this, because, and I don't have my notes in front of me on this one, but I think so. He had a daughter, but I think he had a daughter by a woman that was not his wife, and then he later marries this woman whose father was the head of like the East India Tea Company, which had something to do with the Boston Tea Party up in there. But I think, and Ray, I have to go check, our listeners can check on this, but I believe that the wife or the person that he marries was Margaret Wake, and that Wake County was named Wake County because of Tryon's wife. So there is still legacy. Anybody who's in Raleigh, that area, when you go through Wake County, you now understand that the reason it was named Wake County was because of Tryon's wife, whose name was Margaret Wake, and he decided to give her something in her honor and in her memory. So there you go. It's always interesting knowing about the counties.
It makes Valentine's Day flowers look sort of puny.
I mean, yeah. I mean,
he gave his wife a whole county, and people just give their
not just county. I mean, where the current capital is, Raleigh. I mean, so, but that's go ahead.
Makes those grocery store flowers look sort of puny.
But how interesting that it goes from New Bern and makes its way to Raleigh, which just happens to be in Wake County after his wife. And so, yeah, chocolates and the Food Line flour and even an Amazon gift card won't compare to that.
No, nothing but compare to here's a county. Now, of course, during the Revolutionary War, he's going to spend most of his time out on boats outside of New York. And then there's he tries to conduct a spy ring to spy on Washington and the Patriots and the Continental Army. And he does some things in New York, just like he did here in North Carolina, that were good. You talked about the postal system here in North Carolina, which was something that was very good. And he did things like that in New York. Eventually, of course, he's going to, I believe in 1780, He's going to be sent back to England, where he's going to die on January 27, 1788. And try as I might, Chris, I have not been able to find the cause of death for him. I did find a photograph of his tomb, I guess you could say, but exactly why he died, I do not know. But one thing I did not know, Chris, and maybe you can speak to this, is we don't really know what he looked like. There's no, painting of William Tryon that, yeah, this is him. There's paintings of him, but nobody knows which one, if any of them, are accurate.
But and I don't. This will go into 3 podcasts when I ask you this question. But wasn't there some controversy also with the different people that painted Washington? Because like Washington preferred a specific way of how he wanted to be remembered. And so, oh gosh, it wasn't Trumbull, the main Charles Peel, wasn't it? Was it Charles Peel who painted Washington like the most or something? So I know that the people being painted were very selective in how they want it to be. And so I just wonder if Tryon never had a painting that really appealed to him, and therefore he threw them all in the ocean.
Yeah, maybe. You never know. Washington, of course, everybody's familiar with the picture of him on the $1 bill. That was probably one of his least favorite pictures, because you can see his false teeth. If you look at it real closely, you can see his mouth bulging out from those false teeth, which, by the way, were not made of wood. I think we did an episode on that some time ago. Yeah. All right. Well, this wraps up another wonderful episode of History You Didn't Know But Should. Please make sure to follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. You can find us anywhere you find your podcast, including Stitcher, Spotify, and Anchor. Until next time, I'm Ray.
And I'm Chris.
Talk to you later.